Welcome, listener, in the shadows. We bring stories into the light. Join me as we explore the encounters no one speaks of and the things that watch from the dark. You were never supposed to see this, but since you have, you might as well wear it. From the vaults of the shadows, a new collection of unsettling apparel and artifacts pulled straight from the stories that were never meant to surface. Soft, worn-in shirts and hoodies that feel like something you dug out of a locked trunk in an abandoned ranger station. This isn't just merch, it's evidence. Cinders of the cleansed, I escaped a cult that worships fire. But the flames followed me, Chapter 1. The road back to Caleb's wake. The road to Caleb's wake was narrower than David remembered. The forest had grown thicker in the years since he'd fled, and the underbrush now clawed at the truck like it wanted to peel the paint off, pull them both back into the soil. The branches arched overhead, choked with black moss, filtering the daylight into a bruised twilight haze. "You're quiet," said Jules, his voice low and steady, the way it always was when he was trying not to show concern. David tightened his grip on the wheel. "It looks different." Jules gave a humorless chuckle. "I thought you people weren't supposed to care about how things looked." "We didn't. That was the point," David sighed. "You give up the world to gain something purer, something that can't rot or lie." "Fire doesn't rot, but it sure as hell lies," Jules muttered, staring out the window at the trees. They'd left civilization hours ago. No cell signal, no more power lines, no more road signs. The gravel path had thinned into a dirt trail barely wide enough for the truck. It smelled like mildew and old smoke. David's fingers trembled slightly against the steering wheel. Not fear, not exactly. It was something older, coiled deep in his chest like kindling waiting to catch. "Why now?" Jules asked. "Why go back after 10 years? David didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached down to the center console and pulled out the envelope. The paper was warped, edges charred as if singed by open flame. He handed it over. Jules unfolded it and stared at the photograph inside. It showed a group of robed figures, backs turned, standing before a blackened stone arch. A child was at the center, dressed in white, surrounded by the glow of embers. This recent, a week ago, no return address, no name, but that arch, that was the chapel kiln. The night I left, it was caved in, burned down with the elders inside. I watched the fire swallow them. Jules lowered the photo. "And now it's rebuilt," David nodded. "Which means someone rebuilt the covenant, or maybe it never ended." They drove in silence after that. The trees swallowed the truck in shadow. Chapter 2, the welcome pyre. They arrived at dusk. Caleb's wake didn't rise from the woods so much as it smoldered there. The village was rebuilt in the same crooked grid David remembered, but everything now was darker, hardened by fire. Houses had no paint, only scorched wood and iron-plated doors. In the center stood the kiln chapel, towering and angular, belching smoke through a rusted chimney that forked like antlers. Children with soot on their cheeks watched from porches, silent, still. A man emerged from the chapel steps as David and Jules stepped from the truck. He wore the robe, coarse burlap blackened by years of soot. His face was gaunt, but his eyes gleamed with purpose. "Brother David," the man said, his voice ringing out like a hymn. "We knew the flame would call you home." David didn't recognize him. "You were a child," David said slowly. The man smiled. "We all were, until we burned. I am now called Shepherd Malric." Jules stepped forward. "We're just here to ask some questions. We're not staying." Malric turned to him, and for a moment his expression darkened, not in anger. "Pity, only the burned may understand," he said gently. "But you are welcome to walk the embers, friend of David." He extended his hand, palm up, revealing the sigil, a flame etched into the skin over old scar tissue, burned in, not tattooed. David looked past him to the chapel doors, where more robed figures gathered in flickering torchlight. Something about their posture, their silence, the smoke coiling around them, it made his skin crawl. "Where's the child from the photo?" David asked. Malric's eyes twitched with amusement. "Would you believe me if I said they transcended?" "No." "Then stay, see for yourself," Jules muttered. "I don't like this." David looked at the chapel again. "Neither do I, but I need to know." because in the photo, behind the child in the smoke, was a figure David had seen burned to death a decade ago, his sister, and she was smiling. Chapter 3. Smoke in the walls. They were given lodging in what Malric called the guest hearth. It had once been a tool shed. David remembered it, barely. But now it had a bed of nailed-together planks, rough wool blankets stiff with soot, and a single lantern hanging from a bent nail in the ceiling. Everything smelled of old firewood, scorched meat, and something sweeter, sourer, like burnt sap. Jules set his bag down with a grunt and looked around. Is it hospitality if you feel like you're being stored? David was already examining the walls. There used to be scripture here, he murmured, running his fingers over charred grooves. They burned it in when I was 10. Verses from the Ember Doctrine. Ash is memory. Flame is the tongue of God. Jules knelt near the baseboard and peeled something off the floorboards. A curl of skin, blackened, too thick to be animal. He didn't say anything, just stood and tossed it out the window. You okay? David asked. I'm not the one with a branding scar and unresolved childhood trauma, Jules said flatly. But sure, peachy. David managed a dry smile and sat on the edge of the bed. It creaked under his weight like a coffin lid settling. There was a knock, 3 precise taps. David opened the door. A girl stood there, maybe 16. Soot smeared beneath her eyes like mascara, barefoot, her robe frayed at the edges. She held a ceramic bowl. For the guests, she said. Her voice was soft, practiced. Inside the bowl was a paste, grey and lumpy, reeking of charcoal and boiled grain. What is it? Jules asked. Bread of the kindling, the girl replied. You must eat before the cleansing. She bowed and turned without waiting for response. David closed the door slowly, staring at the bowl. Jules poked it with a fork from his bag. I'd rather chew asphalt. David didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the lantern and turned the wick down low, letting shadow crawl across the room. There's something off, he said. The Covenant didn't used to let outsiders near the chapel. Now Malric's giving us front row seats. Yeah, Jules muttered. And all the kids here, they're blank, quiet like they've been prepped. Groomed, David said darkly. Same way I was before the embering. Jules looked at him. What exactly happens at this cleansing ceremony tomorrow? David's jaw tightened. If they've kept the old rites, it starts at dawn. They build a ring of fire around the chapel. New initiates walk through smoke. The heat is unbearable. The robes catch if you pause too long. And the kid in the photo. If they passed through and lived, they'd be marked. If they screamed or ran, they'd be taken. David looked down at the ashes that always seemed to settle on his palms. The Covenant believes only silence in fire proves you're pure. A noise stopped them, soft, from inside the walls, not an animal, not pipes, breathing. David stepped toward it, pressing his ear to the paneling. There again, raspy, wet. A voice muffled by timber and smoke. Let me out, David stumbled back. Jules had already pulled a hunting knife from his boot. What the hell was that? David turned to him, face pale. They seal the impure in the walls. They call it the quieting. Jules was already moving. We're not sleeping here. But as they stepped outside, a figure stood in the path. Not Malric, not a child. It was a woman, skin raw, eyes weeping soot. Her mouth was open, stretched wide in a silent scream. Her robes had burned into her skin. She raised a hand. David froze. Sierra, he whispered. It was her, his sister, the one he had seen burned to death. She mouthed something slowly, deliberately. Help me. Then the wind shifted, and she was gone, leaving only a swirl of ash in her shape. Chapter 4. The Ember Doctrine. The next morning arrived like a knife. Not in sunlight, but in heat, dry and oppressive, heavy as cloth over the mouth. Smoke bled through the forest, not from wildfire, but from every chimney in Caleb's wake. Incense burned everywhere, pine pitch, dry cedar, and something sharper like scorched bone. David hadn't slept. Neither had Jules. The breathing behind the walls had gone silent around midnight, but the silence was worse. It was expectant. They stood outside the guest hearth, watching villagers in their scorched robes drift like ghosts toward the chapel kiln. A funeral procession without the corpse. Or maybe they were all corpses walking. She was here, David said. It wasn't a dream, it was her. Jules didn't respond right away. He had his camera out, filming slowly. The lens zoomed in on a child with no eyebrows, their face dusted in ash, carrying a bowl of glowing coals with bare hands. "They're staging this," he said under his breath. "Like they want us to see it," David nodded. "That's how it always started. First, they show you the pageantry. The pageantry breaks down resistance. The mind follows the fire." At the chapel doors, Malric stood waiting, arms open in welcome. Beside him, a young girl, maybe 10, stood barefoot in a white robe, shivering. "She's the Ember Child," David murmured. "They anoint one every season." "What's that mean?" "She walks first." The inside of the chapel kiln was larger than it should have been. The ceiling disappeared into black timber and rafters, caked in soot thick as velvet. Fires burned in iron grates around the circular chamber, and in the center stood the hearth, the mouth of God, they called it. A pit of glowing coals 10 feet across, lined in stone and ribbed metal, its base pulsing with dull orange light like a living thing. Benches lined the walls, already filled with silent, ash-faced congregants. The Ember Child stood at the edge of the pit, facing the flames. Malric raised his hands. "The world is rot," he said. His voice rang out like a cathedral bell, echoing in the dry space. "We are born in sin, steeped in shadow. But fire is truth. Fire is the first and final tongue." The crowd murmured in rhythm. "Only ash is holy." Malric turned slowly, letting his gaze sweep over the room. "We welcome back one of our own," he said. "He who strayed from the flame, who returns now not for judgment, but remembrance. Brother David, come forward." David felt every muscle seize. "Do not move," but his feet were already moving. Jules grabbed his arm. "David, I have to see," he whispered. "I need to know how deep it goes." He stepped into the circle. The heat swallowed him. Malric embraced him like an old friend, his robes exhaling smoke. "Do you remember the words?" he asked quietly, almost gently. David's throat felt dry as cinders. "The Ember Doctrine," Malric smiled. David closed his eyes. "Burn away the flesh that lies. Burn the voice that speaks falsehood. Burn the thought that clings to rot. Ash endures." The room echoed with every syllable. Malric beamed. "You are not forgotten, brother." He turned to the Ember Child. "She is ready." 2 robed women emerged from the shadows, each carrying a silver bowl. One contained coals. The other held water, black and still, filled with floating cinders. Malric dipped his fingers into the coals and anointed the girl's forehead, shoulders, and hands. The skin sizzled. She did not cry. Then the cinder water poured over her head. Smoke rose in white ribbons. "Walk," Malric commanded. The girl obeyed. Barefoot, she stepped onto the stone rim of the hearth and began walking the narrow path around the mouth of God. The flames roared. Her robe fluttered like a dying flag. David held his breath. One slip, one stumble, that's all it took. Jules muttered, This is performance. This is abuse." The girl faltered. Her toe caught the edge. The crowd gasped. But a hand reached out and caught her. Sarah. She was there, among the congregation, in a robe, eyes wild with smoke and sorrow. David stumbled forward. "Sarah," she looked at him. Her mouth moved. "They never let us leave." Malric clapped his hands once sharply. 2 men in burnt robes grabbed David by the arms. "Brother David is unwell," Malric said calmly. "He remembers too much. Let us help him forget." Jules was already moving. "Let him go." The last thing David saw before darkness surged in was the firelight catching Sarah's face. Her skin blistered, lips burned black, but her eyes were still hers. And they were pleading. Chapter 5. The furnace below. When David came to, he was cold. Cold in the center of a place built for heat. He lay on stone, slick, damp, and dark. The air was metallic, tinged with mold and rusted iron. A single slit of red light leaked from under the door, casting the chamber in a dying hue. Chains rattled faintly somewhere nearby, followed by the sound of slow, dragging footsteps. He sat up, head pounding. His wrists were bound, not tight, but ceremonial, knotted with red twine soaked in ash water. Not meant to restrain, meant to humble. The room smelled not of fire, but of what came after, char, iron, and rot. "Welcome back, brother." The voice came from the shadows. Malric. He stepped into view holding a torch, its flame bent inwards as if trying to recoil from him. You remember the Ember Doctrine so well, Malric said. But memory is not purity. It is a wound that must be burned clean. David stood slowly, wobbling. Where is she? Malric cocked his head. Sera. His face darkened, not cruelly but reverently. She was the first to walk the flame and return speaking the true tongue. The ash of her lungs sanctified this place. She chose to stay after you fled. She chose the furnace. David's voice shook. You killed her. Malric stepped closer. No, we refined her. Behind him, the stone wall opened. A rusted gate dragged aside. Beyond it was a spiral staircase descending into blackness. Warm air breathed out, rank and humming like something alive. She waits below, Malric said. Would you like to see her again? Meanwhile, Jules was running. Through alleys of soot-black homes, past children with blank eyes and mouths full of cinders, deeper into Caleb's wake than he ever meant to go. The chapel was a beacon now, its chimney spewing coils of black smoke that sounded almost like voices. He ducked behind a barn. His hands shook as he pulled out his phone. No signal, still, but the last video he shot, he pulled it up. There, the Ember Child faltering at the pit's edge. Then frame by frame, the hand that caught her, not human, elongated fingers, skin like cooled lava, her face not Sera's, not anymore. He breathed hard, chest tight. They hadn't just burned her, they had made something of her. You shouldn't have come alone, said a voice behind him. Jules spun. An old woman stood there, hunched and shaking. She didn't wear robes, just a cloak of burlap stitched with old keys, feathers, and bits of scorched glass. Her eyes were white as chalk, pupils gone. I was part of the first covenant, she whispered. Before Malric, before the doctrine turned black. Jules stared. What the hell is going on here? They're not burning people, she said, lips trembling. They're tempering them. David descended. The stairwell was carved from the earth itself, smooth and steaming, lined in rivulets of molten rock that pulsed faintly, like veins. As he went lower, the stone became metal, old furnace plates, hammered together with bolts big as fists. The air was wet and searing. At the base, he entered a wide chamber, the furnace. Chains hung from the ceiling. A ring of fire circled the room, not to burn, but to trap. And in the center, Sera, or what was left. She knelt, eyes closed, skin grey with cinder veins glowing faintly beneath. Her hair had fallen out in tufts. Her hands were scarred down to the bone, yet her face still held the shape of who she had been. Her lips moved. David stepped closer, whispering. Sera, she opened her eyes, and they were full of flame. Brother, she breathed. Her voice layered, broken. You left me in the dark, but the fire, it never left me. David knelt. I thought you were gone. I was, she said. Then I became more. From the shadows, Malric spoke. She is the first Ashen, a vessel tempered by death and devotion. Sera rose. Her robe flared as if windless fire blew from beneath her. You must walk through, David, she said. Burn with me. He stared at the ring of fire encircling them both. Beyond it, the world seemed so far away, and he was no longer sure he wanted it back. Chapter 6. Cinderblood. Jules found the furnace's outer wall behind the chapel, hidden beneath what looked like a collapsed grain silo blackened by fire. He pried open the rusted latch with a crowbar he'd stolen from the supply shed, teeth clenched as the metal groaned like it hadn't been opened in years. The door breathed heat into his face, moist, human heat. Inside, he was met with a corridor of hammered iron and soot-caked pipes, flickering with the amber light of exposed flames buried in shallow alcoves. The deeper he went, the more the place stank of sweat, burnt cloth, and blood. He remembered what the old woman said before disappearing back into the smoke. They don't kill unbelievers. They break them, temper them, same as you temper steel, over and over until the soul thins like glass and God can see through it. He didn't believe in God, but whatever was down here wasn't man-made. David stood just outside the ring of fire, body soaked in heat-slick sweat, watching his sister. Sera's skin pulsed like coal under a bellows. With every breath, her flesh cracked and reknit in ember patterns, but her voice, that was still hers. Buried beneath the layers of ash, she was trying to say something. You don't have to do this, he said. Come with me, we can leave again. You remember the quarry, where we used to sneak off and eat stolen peaches? Sera smiled. a faint, trembling expression like a child remembering sunlight. "I remember you screaming," she said, "when the robes caught fire, when they dragged you back before the third step. They said you had the mark of rot, but I knew." She stepped forward. Fire licked up around her, never touching her robes. "I knew you were the only one who wasn't afraid, not of pain, but of what came after." David blinked. His legs were trembling. The crowd above the furnace, watching from grates in the ceiling, began to chant, "Ash is holy, flame is truth, pain is the prophet of purity." Their voices circled like smoke caught in a whirl. Malric stepped up beside Sira, arms spread. "He was always meant to return," he declared, "to finish the walk, to pass through and become cinder blood." David's knees gave slightly. He remembered the third step. The heat had blistered his feet through the robe. He remembered the panic, the way the world warped, the flash of a torch catching his shoulder. He remembered screaming once and then silence. They pulled him back and called him impure. Sira had watched the whole thing. "I never forgave myself," she said. "So I stayed, I burned, and I was reborn." Jules found the final chamber by sound. It was a low hum like wires straining, mixed with a distant sobbing. He crouched beside a vent and peered through. He saw the pit, the ring of fire, the girl Sira, standing like an ember statue. David was on his knees, trembling. Jules drew his camera and hit record, but something was wrong with the lens. The image warped. A heat shimmer bent everything inward. Even Sira's shape stuttered like static, too tall, too still. Her shadow stretched in opposite directions. Then her head turned, not toward David, toward the vent. She saw him. The camera overheated and shut off. A voice, David's, cut through the vent. "Jules," he whispered hoarsely. "Run!" Sira stepped through the flames. They parted for her, smoke trailing behind like a bridal veil. She knelt beside David and took his hand. Her skin was searing hot, but didn't burn. "Will you finish the walk?" she asked softly. David looked into her eyes, and for a second saw her as she was. The girl who used to read by lantern light. The sister who sang to him when he cried. The one who whispered, "We'll leave together next time." He closed his eyes. "I never stopped loving you," he whispered. And then he stood. The fire roared. He stepped into the ring. One pace, two. On the third, the air convulsed, like lungs sucking in ash. And something inside the flame moved. A face, too large. Lips stretched into a grin of bone and molten light. Not Sira, not anymore. Malric chanted. The crowd howled. The flames reached up like hands. Jules kicked the vent open. "David, now!" The distraction was enough. David turned, stumbled, jumped the ring. The fire hissed, screamed. A voice bellowed from the pit, not Malric's, not human. Jules grabbed David's arm as he hit the edge. They collapsed together, gasping. Above, the crowd shrieked. Shadows boiled. Sira stood alone in the fire, her face half human, half coal, watching them go. She didn't follow. She simply whispered, "We'll finish it next time." They didn't stop running until they were in the trees, far enough that the smoke began to thin, far enough that the screams faded. David collapsed beneath a black pine, choking on guilt and soot. Jules sat beside him, wheezing. "We got footage," he said. "Not all of it, but enough to shut this place down." David didn't answer. He just stared at his palms, blistered, but on the right burned into the flesh 3 black steps. Stay tuned for part 2 of the story coming soon. You made it back for now, but the things in the dark never truly leave, do they? They watch, they wait, and perhaps they remember you now too. If you want to hear more, if you dare to listen again, step back into the shadows. Like the video, subscribe, but know this, some doors once opened do not close so easily.